Question time.
So much to talk about this week. Should the case of the police officer cleared of murdering Chris Cabba ever have come to court? And has it damaged still further police relations with some in the black community? And the government's launched no fewer than 4 reviews or consultations this week. Should they not be just getting on and doing things instead? Tonight, we are in Plymouth in the southwest of England, a city with a proud naval history and whose 2 Westminster seats are currently held by Labour. Our audience, though, as every week, reflects the political picture across the nation. Welcome to Question Time. From the government, Steve Reed is the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Before that, he held several shadow briefs, including Home Office, Justice and Local Government. Until July, the Conservatives' Nigel Huddleston was Treasury Secretary, giving him overall responsibility for the tax system. Now he's in the shadow cabinet, keeping an eagle eye on the Labour government's use of the public finances. Making her Question Time debut is Emily Sheffield. In the past, she was editor of the London Evening Standard. Before that, deputy editor at British Vogue. Now she's a broadcaster and columnist and works in artificial intelligence. And Danny Sriskandarajah is chief executive of the left-leaning think tank New Economics Foundation. He also used to run Oxfam UK and has just released his new book, Power to the People, Use Your Voice, Change the World. Good evening. Welcome to our panellists. Welcome to our audience here in Plymouth. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home. Do join the conversation the usual way on social media. It always gets pretty lively on there. Let's start with our first question, shall we, from Steve Ridley.
Thank you. Should we be spending time and money on reparations for the sins of our forebears that are more than 200 years old?
So, I'm sure it wouldn't have escaped your attention. It's been all over the news last night and today that the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting is taking place in Samoa, and a number of the national leaders have got together and said they want reparations to be part of that discussion and to be an official communique. So reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, reparations from the UK. Nigel?
No, I don't think we should pay financial reparations. Slavery is abhorrent. It still exists in parts of the world. The reality is we need to own our history, warts and all, the good and the bad of the British Empire. And, of course, the British Empire did play a role in abolishing slavery over 200 years ago. But I don't think that today's generations should be responsible for the actions and the decisions of our ancestors. We need to know and understand the history. We need to, if appropriate, apologise, and we need to learn the lessons of history. But I don't think paying reparations is the right move. There is a fantastic role for the Commonwealth. I'm a huge supporter of the Commonwealth. We need to focus on the things that we can work on together today and moving forward.
So when the Foreign Minister of the Bahamas says the word is apologise, he's saying that no one has apologised from the United Kingdom, and then it's not just about money, it's about respect, it's about acknowledging that the past was a wrong which needs to be corrected.
And I think acknowledging the past is really important. And I think actually Tony Blair in 2007 at the 200th anniversary of the abolition of slavery did actually apologise.
Well, he expressed his sorrow, certainly. Not the word apologise.
OK, and I think the King has. But I think the sentiment is clearly there, and maybe there's some legal repercussions here that I'm not familiar with in terms of the exact wording, but I do think both the government, in the form of the then Prime Minister, and the King have expressed sorrow.
Keir Starmer doesn't want to apologise or pay out, does he?
No, and I think he's quite right. I mean, Keir would recognise, as I'm sure everyone in the room would, that slavery is a stain on history. And those countries that had, you know, particularly in the Caribbean, where a large part of the current population, their ancestors were enslaved people, there are real issues there that they would want us to work with them and to address. And I think as a leading nation within the Commonwealth, a family of nations, we should be working with the other members of the Commonwealth. But I don't think that means financial exchanges at the cost of the British taxpayer.
So what do you think the Foreign Secretary David Lammy meant in 2018 when he said Britain has never faced justice for the crime of slavery?
Well, I think there are different ways that you can you can deal with justice. You can help deliver justice. You know, for instance,
they want reparations. That's what they want.
But I think there are better ways to do it. You know, I think we are a country that is very well regarded across the world on international development. We want to get back up to 0.7% of GDP on international development. We can't do that until the circumstances in our own country have improved, until we got the economy growing again, because people would rightly expect us to fix our problems at home first. But, you know, we're looking at what we can do on climate change as well. The Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting is happening in Samoa. Samoa is one of those countries that is at risk of sinking through rising sea levels if we don't tackle climate change. And trade, of course. Trade is a very important way that the UK, as a leading global trading nation, can help support the development of economies in developing countries that is sustainable. It's not just giving them one slug of money, it's helping them become richer for the long term. All of that we can do, all of that supports those countries that we are allied with as part of the Commonwealth of Nations.
All right, let's see what our audience thinks. The woman in the green jacket.
In some parts of the Caribbean, there are still families that are benefiting from slavery, like in regards to land and ownership and things like that. And I'm sure it was something like in 2015, I think it was Lloyds Bank or something along those lines, were still paying. They stopped paying compensation for slavery. So that's 2015. We're in 2024. Something has to give.
Well, the fact that the UK government was paying compensation to slave owners until 2015.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's 2024. So the fact that you're saying that there shouldn't be any compensation, I'm sorry. I just, my ancestors being slaves. I'm sorry. I think. You say that there are ways that you can help these countries, but why are we having this discussion now? Like, we need to start helping these countries because those countries are still very poor. They're still not developed as they should be.
And can I ask, would you be happy to pay those reparations out of taxation?
Well, I'm British, aren't I? But it's still my heritage.
No, but that's what I mean. So obviously, if it comes from the government, we'd all be paying it. You'd be paying it too. Okay. The man there in the check shirt, just a little bit further back. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, apologies will go a long way, but we've got probably the richest history in the whole of the world. How far do you go back to apologise and give money for? How far do we go back? Because we can go back as far as you like. We've probably done, just as bad things really back then. So how far do we go back? It's. I have to agree with yourself. You can't just keep giving money out to apologise, because then we go back even further and then you have to give more money out. Where does it stop?
Okay. A woman in the grey cardi. Yeah.
If you're saying there's no reparations, I'm hearing that. What are those ways then of supporting those countries? What is on the table if reparations aren't on the table?
Well, I think there are, skills transfers is one thing that we could look at doing. We've got a lot of people who are skilled at things which they would like to be developing in developing countries as well. Helping to build infrastructure in those countries is something else we can do. We've got a very large economy. We've got a lot of very skilled people. We can do more to support those countries, and all of that has been discussed and is going to be discussed at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa. But I just think it's better to help a country stand on their own 2 feet and prosper themselves, and to just give a one-off transfer of money that isn't necessarily going to lead to long-term benefits to them.
I mean, Danny, the communique, if it comes out, because everyone has to agree at the Commonwealth Summit, including the United Kingdom, it seems to be suggesting that actually what they do want is a sum of money rather than things for the future.
Well, I think the Caribbean Reparations Committee that has looked at this in quite some detail has come up with 10 different demands, if you will. One of those relates to money, but it's a lot more. It's about apologies. It's about a dignified conversation about what should happen next. And I think Keir Starmer is making a mistake by refusing to engage with this at the Commonwealth, to call this about just the past. The last time a British Prime Minister was at CHOGM,
which is the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit.
It was 1985. It was Margaret Thatcher, and she was in a minority of one in refusing to impose sanctions on South Africa because she said Britain can't afford it because it would affect our economic interest. History was against her. And what I think she didn't realise was that what she should have done at the time was engage with the Commonwealth. That's what it's there for. It's exactly the sort of forum to have these sorts of discussions. And I fear that Keir Starmer is again going to be in a minority of one, isolated, and the tide of history is turning. The gentleman's right. There have been all sorts of evils that humans have done to each other, but never, I would say, at the industrial scale of transatlantic slave trade. And there are countless British institutions, companies, individuals, foundations, and the state that were implicated in that. And so I think it would be far better for Keir Starmer to say, let's have an honest conversation about how Britain confidently faces up to those responsibilities.
I mean, there's one report that suggests that the UK owes over £18 trillion for its role in slavery in 14 Caribbean countries. Now, I hear you saying it's not just about money. But should the government be paying that kind of money?
Well, before we even get to the money, let's talk about the principle. I think what we need...
OK, but let me just ask, in principle, I don't know whether it be 18 trillion or not, but should the government be paying reparations, in principle?
Well, yes, and so should every institution that was directly involved in the transatlantic slave trade. And let's not forget, there are institutions already in Britain that are doing exactly that. There's an Oxford College that paid Antigua and Barbuda a sum. There are private foundations that have looked in their past and found that some of the wealth that they sit on is directly from the proceeds of the transatlantic slave trade, and they are paying not necessarily to individuals, but sometimes, as Steve says, to improve health outcomes in the Caribbean or to improve educational outcomes.
I think skills transfers like that are very helpful, actually. Yeah.
I think it's an incredibly complex question. I agree with quite a bit of what you say in that, and I think your initial question, Steve, was that is this something, you know, we should be spending time discussing? And the King, actually, King Charles, has come out with a rather different approach to Keir Starmer, which is that he has said today we must understand the path of history. And I do think there is further acknowledgement to be made of the pain, the stain, the long arm of that terrible period of history that caused so much damage to so many countries, to so many communities, and I think still very much resonates in communities around the world today. However, and I think that conversation needs to be ongoing, and it is. And as a country, I think we have actually been very slow in acknowledging the pain of colonialism, while also accepting that it did benefit in some countries as well. And I'm not talking about slavery. Please don't imagine that I am. But I think, to your point, we always seem to end up talking about money. But actually, as you say, reparations is not just about money. It is about acknowledging what happened.
But they are talking about money as well. I mean,
they are, but actually to say that Philip Davis, the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, said that what they're really looking for is frank conversation and that it's not about money or apologies, but an appreciation of what ancestors went through. So I think it does always come back to money, and then money is the bit where we get into a lot of problems, because who are we paying the money to? Is it the children? Is it the great? You know, this was 200 years ago. Which countries should get more money? Who should pay them more? Britain was not the only one who conducted the slave trade. America, the French colonies, they actually abolished slavery quite a lot later than us. So I think that is where it constantly gets brought back to the focus on money. Well, that is the most tricky part of it. And that is where I do agree. There are some other things maybe we could do. There is historic debt sitting on a lot of these countries. You know, is there a better way that global communities could re-stagger that debt? That might be one way, rather than just like, here's some hard cash.
Man here in the front.
Yeah, I think you're opening a can of worms, to be honest. I think you're asking a country to be responsible for something that happened 200 years ago, and for me to pay that to someone who wasn't even there, I find it all ridiculous, I really do.
You find it ridiculous?
Yeah. Why should I pay for something that happened before I was alive to someone who wasn't alive then?
But do you acknowledge that it's good that we talk about it? Because there will be many communities in this country.
Businesses and that, but not to be, because it sounds like a fine to me. That's what it sounds like, and I don't think you should hold today's people in contempt for that.
OK. Let me hear from the man in the blue jacket there, yeah.
We're talking about recent history, about 200 years, but what if we go further back? Weren't pretty much all of our ancestors enslaved? You know, where do we draw the line? Do we go for compensation against Italy for the Romans, or, you know, where do we actually draw the line here? It does seem that it's only because it's recent history that we can refer to it. But because
Well, it's not that
of
recent,
the
obviously. I mean, 200 years ago.
I know, but compared to the Romans, it's relatively recent. So, you know, if we look back at our history, we've been enslaved. So where do we go for our compensation?
Okay. Did you want to just quickly
I
come
think
in?
that I can see why that argument is tempting, but what we have before us on this particular issue is indisputable evidence that real harm was caused to the people involved and their ancestors today by the direct involvement of a bunch of British institutions, including the state. And so this is why it's not just about the government, it is about a whole range of institutions. And so, you know, let's not get distracted by the sort of what about all the other crimes of history. Let's deal with this one, and let's deal with it confidently, facing to the future, unlike what Margaret Thatcher was trying to do 40 years ago, sticking our head in the sand. You know, this is an opportunity for Britain to lead by example, to show that the world that we are a progressive internationalist nation that's committed to partnerships of the sort.
I think the key point there, though, is the future. You know, the history is important. It defines us, it shapes us. But this conversation should really be about how we face our future and how we support those countries to face theirs.
You've made that point. Thank you, Steve. Right, I'm going to move on. Forgive me, those of you who've got your hands up, because I want to get some more questions in. Before I do, I just want to say that next week we're in Guildford in Surrey, and the week after that we're off to Hartlepool. So if you live in or around either of those two places and you'd like to come and be part of the Question Time audience, why wouldn't you? Look at them. It's great. Come apply to the Question Time website. Here's the instructions, and you'll follow the instructions there, and hopefully we will see you in either those places, Guildford or Hartlepool. And I just want to say also that the Question Time that we did, the kind of US election special we filmed in Philadelphia, is still available on the iPlayer. It was pretty lively. So I would say it's worth a watch. Anyway, right, let's take our next question now from Diane. Is it Worker or Verka? I should have checked.
You can say workers.
Worker, there we go. Off you go.
Why should we have to pay more for the water companies' ineptitude?
Well, obviously, Steve, I am going to come to you as Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Now, I know you've announced this big commission, a review of the water sector, the first one of this scale, I think, since privatisation. Why should we, Diane asks, have to pay more for the water companies' ineptitudes?
Well, it's a really, really good question, and we have made some big announcements on that this week as well. But the starting point of all of this, and I know people here will be as angry as people are up and down the country, but every single river in our country is to some extent polluted. Our lakes and our seas, when I was a kid, you could just go down there and splash around in them. Today, you'd worry if you took your kids or your grandkids down there for fear of what they might catch from contaminated water. And that's because last year we had the highest levels of pollution in our water that had ever been recorded. And that's absolutely shocking when you think of something as pristine as the water in our countryside can become toxic and poisonous. And the reason this is happening, the reason that we're getting all of that sewage pouring out is, first of all, our water infrastructure, the sewers themselves, have been allowed to crumble. They're in a state of disrepair that if it was things in your own home, you would never have allowed them to go into that state. So they can't be managed in the way that they should be. And the reason they've got into that state is because the regulator, under the last government, they weakened regulation of the water companies. The regulator has been toothless in tackling some of the abuses that were going on. Particularly infuriating is the fact that while they were failing to invest in our water infrastructure, they were awarding themselves multi-million-pound bonuses and paying out dividends to their shareholders that were not deserved because they weren't investing enough in the infrastructure in the first place. Now, the reason that Ofwat, the regulator, is proposing what will be eye-watering increases in bills is because that maintenance wasn't carried out steadily over the last 14 years. The cost of repairing it now is so high, it's going to cost a bigger amount of money to tackle that. I can't undo the state of disrepair that our sewage and water system is in today. I can change the system so it can never happen again, and that's why we're bringing in measures already. I'm ring-fencing money that customers pay so it can only be spent on infrastructure and not shifted off to pay bonuses and dividends to the water companies and the water bosses.
But what you seem to be saying, just coming back to Diane's question, is why should we have to pay more?
Well, that's
the truth
why.
is, we're just going to have to pay more. No, but hang on. The truth is, we are just going to have to pay more.
Well, this is the reason. I can't magic away the damage that happened because the Conservative government didn't make sure
I hear you've made that quite clear, but you're just saying the fact is we do have to pay more.
But I just want to say the other things that we're doing, because it's really important to the points that we were talking about very, very quickly. But we've got a water special measures bill going through Parliament right now that will ban the payment of undeserved bonuses to water bosses and make water bosses criminally liable for severe law breaking of the kind that they've got away with. And yesterday I announced a major commission under a former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England to look root and branch at regulation so we can get the regulator and the teeth that the regulator needs to hold those water companies to account and make sure they better serve customers and the environment, and we never, ever end up in a situation where our water is full of sewage in the way that it became under the Conservative government.
Such a pity Tony Blair didn't take any of this action himself. Isn't that true?
Well, how many years ago was it that Tony Blair was elected?
Let's just get to the detail of this. Margaret Thatcher privatised the water companies because we needed urgent money coming into, as you say, a Victorian system that simply can't cope with a very, very large growth in population and recently flooding. To begin with, that privatisation pumped billions in. There was then 20 years, I'm afraid, from then of mistake after mistake after mistake by every single government. And under Tony Blair, I'm afraid to say, the debt was allowed to balloon to epic proportions in these companies. The debt to equity went up to 80%. Anyone here, if you want to look up what happened when Macquarie, I think, bought Thames Water, and what they did was suck out every single penny. Dividends were being sort of motored out to all these investors, and Tony Blair did nothing to stop it at the time. He really didn't. I am not saying the Tories have done much of a better job, but they did at least start the process. And a bunch of measures.
The regulator.
No.
They weakened
in 2003, Tony Blair also. We can argue over every single thing, but Tony Blair also handed out 25-year deals. He also extended 5-year regulation. He could have tightened up these regulators as well, and he didn't. And the Tories Act in 2023 did finally, thank God, actually give Ofwat greater powers. A lot of the regulation you're talking about going through Parliament now was regulation the Tories were planning on as well.
Absolute nonsense. No, it isn't. I was literally calling for them to ban bonuses to water bosses, and they refused until just before the election, when they knew they had no time to do it.
The very fact that anyone from 2021 knew how filthy our water was is because it was the Conservatives who started measuring it. Now, I'm not defending the Tories. I am saying this is lots of governments.
What's the point of measuring the sewage going into the rivers?
Look, there's lots of hands up. Lots of hands up. I want to hear from them. Yes, the man there in the black T-shirt.
Isn't it about time to renationalise the water companies then? Because all of this started under Thatcher.
Right. And look, I'm going to come to... I'm coming up... See, let's just deal with that a minute, and I'll come to you too as well. England is quite an outlier when it comes to having a fully privatised water system. I mean, depending on where you look for information, it's either the only country that does it or one of a handful that does it. Is nationalisation... I knew that would get a round of applause. I didn't know you were going to say that, but as soon as you said it, I thought, is nationalisation something that is just inconceivable?
Well, let me tell you why we've ruled it out. If you remember the Olympics in France, in Paris, France has a nationalised water system. People couldn't go in the River Seine because it was full of sewage. Scotland
I think in Paris it was privatised and they've renationalised it. Is that right?
Well, it hasn't worked. Scotland has a nationalised system and they've got the same pollution issues as England. The problem is a failure of regulation and governance, which is why we're looking at giving the regulator the teeth they need.
Isn't it really just because we can't afford it?
No, well, there are other reasons as well as I don't think it's the right question to ask to sort the problem out. It would cost nearly £100 billion to buy out the current water companies. And you see the state of the economy. There just isn't money to do that even if we wanted to. But also, it would take several years to unpick the current ownership models, during which time you'd have no investment coming in whatsoever. And the problem with pollution in our waterways would get worse. Now, I'm more interested in the purity of our water than the purity of our ideology. So I'm going to do what works. That is looking at regulation and governance, giving the regulator the teeth they need to crack down on the water companies and finally clean up our rivers, lakes and seas for good.
Right. Lots of hands up. I'm going to go around lots of you before I come to you, Per, so be patient. I'll be there in a minute. Yes.
Thank you. You make the point that eye-watering bills are coming our way. Why don't you go further and stop all bonuses until this is resolved, which will lessen the pain to the customer?
OK. Man there in the white top and the glasses. On the end there,
I was going to say the exact same thing. You're saying to us that we can't afford to buy out the companies, but their shares should be worthless because they're not running the companies the way they're meant to be running.
OK. Man in the glasses and the cap.
Yeah, as a pensioner, I'm already going to have to turn my heating off in winter. Am I going to have to turn my stopcock off as well?
Woman in front of you.
When I was a student here in the 90s, South West Water were talking about their clean sweep programme, and we were paying more money then than the rest of the country for our water. Yeah, it's still just as bad. So you say Ofwat will sort it out, but they haven't for the last 25 years. So how do you expect us to have faith in you when nothing changes?
That's exactly what we're looking at.
Man here in the yellow
Exactly
T-shirt.
Yeah, given that the private companies have diverted the money for investment into our infrastructure to shareholder profits, why don't you ask the private companies to pay?
Right, well, and some of those companies are in debt, actually. They're going to struggle to do that, I think. Man there in the middle, you've got a tattoo on your arm, I can see. You're holding it up, yeah.
Yeah, we're in Plymouth, and it's now become a national marine park, one of the first, I think, in the UK. It's really embarrassing on the hospitality side. When we have tourists, we've got cruise ships coming in, and they can't even go in our water.
Have you got... I mean, what would you do? I mean, it's a very difficult question, but I just wonder if you have a view.
What would I do? I think I would be looking, like the gentleman said on the panel, looking at the bonuses and actually retracting back. We just talked about compensation from the historic slaves. Why are we not looking at the problems and then getting historic compensation back to us from the water companies?
One idea.
Steve talked about ideology, and the question was about why are we paying for the ineptitude of the water companies? We're not. We're doing something worse than that. We're paying for the insidious ideology of that 1980s moment of deciding to take what is an essential service, a basic human right, something that humans can't live without, and based on an insidious ideology, privatise it. Worse still, it's based on awful economics. Why on earth would you privatise a service that is effectively a monopoly? We don't have a choice to turn on a different tap if our water company is doing a bad job or raising prices. And the money, when it comes to compensation, is exactly how we should look at it. This is the biggest heist in plain sight that this happened in this country. £85 billion is what the University of Greenwich estimates has been paid to the shareholders of these companies, while we, I quote, have been treated like cash cows. How can that be right? It's based on a insidious ideology and bad economics. And I hope, Steve, you and your government, I welcome your review. I think you have a chance to put it right, not just for the next few years, but for generations to come.
Yeah. I'd just like to...
Just quickly, Emily,
I just think that it's so easy for you to sit there and say, great, let's renationalise. There was a reason why Margaret Thatcher tried to bring in private investment, because during the 60s and 70s, again, several governments massively underinvested in our water system. The bill, even at that point, to update that system was absolutely vast. And for those of you older in the audience will remember that when Margaret Thatcher took over, this country was on its knees after successive Labour governments.
Emily, can I ask...
It's just so easy. It's just so easy to say renationalise.
But what about on the investment question?
With what money?
Well,
We're
on the
about to have
investment
huge
question.
tax rises next week. We have to accept that private investment comes in. The great tragedy, and this is why I absolutely agree with you, is that successive mistakes were made over that privatisation through Tony Blair, the end of John Major, through this government as well. It's been badly run.
Well, let's ask someone from that previous government. Nigel, account for yourself. Why didn't you sort this out?
Look, the problems that we're facing now with our water in all sorts of areas has been decades in the making, as Emily said. Since
yes, but you had 14 years to at least make it a bit better, and
we
you
have
failed.
done it. Since privatisation, there's been £190 billion of investment in our water systems. If that wasn't through the dynamics of the private system investment, you would have paid for that through your taxes and probably more as well. And, Danny, I'd probably say you've got greater confidence in people in Whitehall running businesses than I do. I think, actually...
Well, these aren't spectacularly successful businesses, are they?
Since 2010, as well, it's really important. We needed to monitor what was happening. We've had now, I think when Labour in power, it was about 7% of sewage outlets were monitored. It's now 100%. So now we know where the problems are happening, when they're happening, and can target and actually fine, and where possible now. And Steve, with the greatest respect, I heard you in the Chamber of the House of Commons the other day. You re-announced a lot of things we were already doing.
No, you
and you've kicked things into long grass.
14 years,
you
announced done them.
You've had 14 years to come up with a policy. Instead, actually, you've just announced a new commission to kick it into the long grass.
Nigel, why did you vote against an amendment in May that would have seen water companies in court for repeated serious sewage offences?
We brought in legal binding targets, and actually, in terms of the votes, I think this is really important because you would all have seen during the election an utter nonsense going out there on social media. I voted for legally binding targets.
But you didn't vote for water companies.
No, but we brought that in then. We were bringing that in at the end of the last government. And I say, look, there's no easy answers here, but I think one really important thing is the Labour Party said to you all, we're going to nationalise this. Simple, easy solution. They are learning the lesson now that government is
Labour
hard.
Party's not saying they're going to nationalise
No, exactly. They've changed their mind because they were indicating that to many of you before the election, if you remember. And it's really important. They've realised now the only way they nationalise, that would cost you more money. And also, Steve admitted there is no evidence it would lead to improvement. And the reason for that is the reason Steve just said. Because where we've got nationalised it, in Scotland, in France, it hasn't led to better services. So, look, there's no easy answer here. We do need to hold the water companies to account, but I don't think nationalisation is an easy solution. You'll end up picking the tab for it.
Woman at the back, I think you've got a green top on.
No matter whether we go with the current government's plans or renationalise, when can we expect to actually see the differences in the water quality to be able to go swimming, kayaking?
What a great question. When's it going to get better, Steve?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that, you know, you can't fix it overnight.
But do you have any idea in your mind?
Well, from next April, we want, you know, if
but it's not going to get better next April, is it?
If we're able to get... We're looking at bringing in over £88 billion of private sector money to come into the water sector starting next April. That would immediately start investing in the infrastructure that would mean you'd start to see reductions in sewage. What I want to get to...
But hang on, all that in fairness, but in terms of openness, transparency, because investing in infrastructure, should that come to pass in the way you're suggesting, obviously takes time. Things take time to build. Of course they do. Everyone understands that. So what should we be expecting by the end of this Parliament? What was your name? Should Georgia be expecting to be able to go swimming and not think, I better be looking where I'm...
What I'm going to do is I'm going to work with the regulator and the water companies and establish their investment plan with milestones that the public can hold us to account for. So you'll be able to see what every few years will have been done, how the sewage will have been reduced, where will have been reduced, so that you can see where it's safer to go swimming, whereas at the moment you can't. It's not just actually a sewage problem. You've got South West Water here. You had, at the same time, floods and a hosepipe ban. Plenty of water coming down, not the infrastructure to get it where it needs to be. So it's not just sewage. The problem's more profound than that. And as things stand, by the middle of the 2030s, we start to run short of drinking water. I'm not going to let that happen. We're not going to have rationing. I've got to get this investment in, but you will see the improvements year on year as we move forward.
I'm going to take a couple more points, then I'm going to move on. Yes, woman here.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not just the water companies, is it? I think we've got this problem of a lot of public services that have gone into private hands, and they're all suffering from it. You look at the railways and the money that's going to actually other countries' national railway systems, and it's like we're subsidising their public transport.
Man there in the tie, yes.
Following what the lady said there, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of other industries and services where this has become a problem, and I think everybody on the panel has recognised that the money that was in these companies has been sucked out and dividends have been paid when money was actually earmarked for investment. Isn't this just one symptom, though? Because it's the water company today, it's going to be something else tomorrow. Why aren't the government saying, actually, do you know what? If we've got an industry where it's an infrastructure or a public service, why aren't dividends controlled much stricter so that we already have the capability to go back to those directors and say, hey, you took money that you shouldn't have, and we want it back because we're paying for it now.
That is what was brought in 2023 by the Conservative government, and I think you could probably give them stronger powers, Steve. But, Steve, I did want to ask a question, actually.
Briefly,
just very, very briefly.
I must move on to the next
question.
question.
You say 88 billion of private sector money is coming in. I'm not ideologically against that. I just want to ask you, for that 88 billion of investment, what are those investors going to want in return?
Well, if you invest in an asset, I'm sure you understand how this works. If you invest in an asset that is going to last 100 years...
You want a dividend, you want a profit. What are they getting in return?
A low-risk, low-return investment as part of a portfolio. That's the way that we can get that huge slug of money up front that we need to repair the broken infrastructure that they just ignored and let crumble.
It just feels like a repeat
without
of the
going to
past. That's all
taxpayers,
I'm
Emily,
concerned
without
about.
going to taxpayers and increasing the burden on working people, which we ruled out.
Okay.
We've got to get that money in. These people aren't going to be the ones that pay the price for it.
Let me take another... I knew loads of you want to talk about this, particularly down here in Plymouth, and I'm really glad we went for that early in the programme. There's a lot of you who've asked about this next issue as well, so I want to tackle this too. Itasha Hunnigan, where... Oh, that's you in the green jacket, OK.
After the acquittal of the policeman accused of murdering Chris Cabba, how can the police re-establish trust within the black community?
So, Itasha, can I just ask what your feeling is about it?
It's obviously, I know the police are there to do a job, they're there to protect, but time after time we see them getting it so wrong, and every time...
And you think they got it... I mean, the man was acquitted by a jury of his peers. Do you think the jury got it wrong?
I tell you what, I just know that I fear for my children. I would like to say that I'm an honest person. I've grown up my children to the best of my ability, but just being... Because there are unconscious bias, and sometimes that plays a part, and I don't think... We know that there's inherited racism within the police as an institution, and I think they need to work harder and to get rid of these unconscious biases. Obviously, what's come to light from Chris Cabba, I can see what's come to light now, and I understand why that whilst the trial was going on. But there has been other occasions where I'm not saying that they got it wrong, because obviously we can see what's happened. But I want to know that when my kids go out, they're not being targeted because of the colour of their skin. I want to know that the males in my family are not being targeted just because of the colour of their skin. And that's what I want. I want trust. I want to feel comfortable when I'm out and about, basically.
Yeah, I think you've touched on the emotions I feel as well. It feels like there are two separate issues here that we have to be careful not to entangle. One is, how do we hold police officers to account? You know, armed officers do an amazing job. They're highly trained professionals who hold a huge responsibility on our behalf. But sometimes they do things wrong and they need to be held accountable. No one should be above the law. And the Louise Casey review of the Metropolitan Police found that in the special firearms division, there is a toxic culture and something does need to be done. There's a second issue, which is around the policing of racialised minorities. You know, I live in South London. People are rightly angry. You know, why is it that even today, 30 years after the Macpherson report, a young black person is 6 times more likely to die after an encounter with the police, 7 times more likely to die in custody than a white person? That's not right. And it exists because of that systemic racism that exists in those institutions. And I think we need to be careful about distinguish these two issues, but we do need to do something about both of them urgently.
I mean, Emily, Itasha put it so eloquently, her fears and concerns. I mean, there's others who feel that this case should never have come to court at all. And in fact, that your concerns are something separate from the case that we've seen with the particular police officer this week.
I think, as editor of the Evening Standard, I worked on this a lot, and I actually did a lot of investigations of young black men dying on the streets, not from police, actually, from gang warfare, and that is also a terrible stain on our society. And I have read horrific victim statements from mothers who have had to cradle their dying 13, 14-year-olds assassinated in the streets by gangs. So I think we need to understand also that a lot of young black boys, predominantly in the streets of London, feel very unsafe because of the gangs roaming the streets. and Chris Cabba was allegedly part of the famous and deeply unpleasant Bricks 67 gang. And I read with a sort of sinking heart, really, how young he was when he was sort of initiated into gangs. 13, I believe, was the first time he got into trouble. And I think with the question of this case, I think we have two things here. We very much need to rely on police officers to protect us, and indeed to protect us from those gangs and try and round them up and deal with them forcefully. But at the same time, as someone who was editor at the Standard when Everard was kidnapped, raped, murdered by a serving firearms police officer, and understand the huge depth of anger about that there is, with all the issues that you've painted and you've painted, there is this deep level of mistrust relationship with the police.
And do you have any sympathy with the view that some police officers are expressing that this case should never come to court at all?
I do have I'm sorry, to come back to your question, I do have sympathy with that, because I think the threshold should be raised. It seemed quite clear once we knew about the history that this never should have gone to court.
I mean, obviously the police officer, when he fired that shot, didn't know that it was Chris Cabba in the car, and he didn't know his history.
He didn't, but the threshold is quite low, and I think that should be raised, that Chris Cabba was driving an Audi at the officers. It was accepted that he did exactly what he should have done by his training. So the fact that was then, moved up into a murder case, I don't really understand. And that may have been that the Met and the Crown prosecution case have very much in mind this history between the police and the community, and maybe it did get pushed forward in a way that maybe it shouldn't. The police officer, is now going to live in fear, basically, for the rest of his life and under protection. So we're somehow not getting it right. But both of these things need to be worked on more together.
Man in the red glasses.
I firmly believe that the vast majority of police officers are being treated like scapegoats. The vast majority of officers are hard-working, dedicated, honest and trustworthy. And there seems to be an awful lot of mudslinging when mistakes happen in all walks of life. But in the majority of cases, the making of a mistake does not result in you facing potential life imprisonment. And this is not the first case, even in the last 12 months or so, where police officers have been either reinstated, having lost their jobs, been living under a cloud for years. And at the end of the day, it's proven that they have done nothing wrong. They've been reinstated. They've been cleared of any use of wrongdoing. And frankly, I think the CPS and the IOPC should be ashamed of themselves for their recent actions. And I do applaud, I believe Yvette Cooper is looking at raising that bar, and not before time.
OK. The woman in the grey cardi.
I accept, what you say about the gang warfare, and I get that. But I think sometimes the narratives kind of reinforce that bias that people have. And so, to me, I still think you have to consider, and this is more of a comment than anything, you have to consider how you eliminate that bias and also build connections. Otherwise, what will happen is, if you don't have that trust, people are going to be afraid to call the police, and you're going to just end up with a spiral.
I 100%. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear enough. I 100% agree with you that the work is not done. Definitely is not.
Man at the very back.
If Chris Cabba had got out of the car and put his hands in the air, he would have been alive today. So the message is, if you obey the law, no matter what creed, colour or race you are, it's unlikely that you're going to come to harm by the police.
OK. Nigel.
Yeah. I think, look, this case has raised a lot of high emotions for obvious reasons. I think it's firstly important that we respect the result of the jury, particularly for politicians to respect the result of juries here, because we weren't aware of all the full information. I think the other things that have come out of this, I'm concerned that we're going to have difficulty getting anybody to want to be a firearms officer unless we're careful in this arena. And they do a really important job and have to make split-second decisions that I don't think any of us in this room would ever want to take. We do need people to do that. They're important for our protection. And therefore, actually, I do welcome Yvette Cooper's announcement about anonymity for officers, unless they're proven guilty. So that, because I am worried about the police officer, having this over him and probably being a target for the rest of his life, and that's not acceptable either. The broader issues the lady raised, though, and it's really alarming to hear you say that you fear for your children's safety, and that just raises a whole host of other issues about inclusivity in society. Look, we need to recruit more police officers from a variety of backgrounds, more ethnic minorities, and the whole gang culture area here as well. Look, it's all about creating opportunities. It's all about making sure that everybody feels that they've got a part in society. Everybody's got jobs. Everybody's got a future. There's no easy solution here. The only other thing I would say, though, is when we start to accuse institutions of institutional racism or something like that, it taints everybody. And I think the gentleman said a moment ago, there are a lot. In fact, the vast majority of police officers are really, really good, and they would never have a racist bone in their body. But there are a few bad apples. But when we start to use words like institutional racism, it taints everybody, and we shouldn't.
I think that's really unhelpful, because I think the learnings from review after review, not just about the police, but are that there are things that happen within institutions, the workplace culture, the so-called banter, the recruitment practices, the neglect of community relations, that mean that some institutions are systematically failing some bits of the population. And it's important that we acknowledge that before we can make progress. If we simply say this is about bad apples, then we're missing the fundamental point here.
Yeah, we've moved on from the bad apples comments, because there's also a lot of problems about sexism as well.
Chris Cubber was shot in Streatham, which is part of my constituency, so I know the community very well that has been affected by this. And I think whatever we now know about Chris Cubber, no one deserves what happened to him, and my heart does go out to his family. Of course, that's what should happen. But we also need to recognise the very, very difficult and challenging job the police have got, and sometimes the split-second decisions that they have to take, and sometimes then those can go wrong. And I think the police always need to know we have their backing. I don't feel I know enough about it to answer that question. We have the CPS there, the Crown Prosecution Service, to look at these things and take decisions on the basis of that. What I think underpins this is that in this country we have something that incredibly valuable: policing by consent. We all take it for granted in this country. Because it's always been there for us. But policing by consent is so important. And there are some parts of our community, with some police forces, and the Met being one of those in London, where trust has broken down. And a lot more work has to be done to rebuild that broken trust. In this case, we can see it between the black community and the police. I recognise what the person in the audience is saying about unconscious bias as well. I brought a law through Parliament to end deaths in mental health custody. And if you look at the faces of the people that died in mental health custody, they're nearly all black young men, because of prejudicial assumptions made about young black men, drugs and violence. And in extremis, it leads to outcomes like that. Now, we need the police to be doing more work to tackle, understand and reduce eliminate unconscious bias. That will help to rebuild that trust between the community, because policing by consent only works if the whole community consents to being policed. And for me, that is a key outcome that we need to learn from this.
We've got 10 minutes more. I'm going to squeeze in one last question from Nikki Hilton. Where are you, Nikki? There you go.
Can a big conversation deliver an NHS fit for the future?
Right, big conversation. So this has been announced by the Health Secretary, your mate, Wes Streeting. I assume he's your mate.
He is.
Which is a consultation exercise with not only members of the public, but also, using that ghastly word, stakeholders, but people involved in providing health services, to come up with some ideas for how the health service could be reformed. Can a conversation... Is this the right way to go about it, Emily?
I think it's a very nice PR exercise. I suspect a lot of people will enjoy filling it in. I think we've had some really good jokes, and there's absolutely no harm in that. My problem with it is that Labour have had 5 years in opposition. They won a huge mandate from the public. Huge mandate. Sorry, but under Keir Starmer. I apologise. 5 years in opposition under Keir Starmer. and they had a huge public mandate, and they should be congratulated for that, for winning that election. But Wes Streeting said, we are going to fix the NHS, and we've got a clear plan. And all that we've seen so far, and we are 3.5 months in, is that consultation after consultation to every single problem is being called. And
actually, we've had 4 this week.
We've had 4 this week. We've had consultation on commission on water, consultation on the NHS, a consultation even on whether we consider we're going to lock prisoners up or not. And at the same time, we've released a lot of prisoners. So I just want to know, Wes Streeting said this week, we have a very clear reform plan and we're going to include the public in it. Well, yes, you have included the public in it. Where is the clear reform plan? There is none. They have not said. They agreed the doctors' pay rise, junior doctors' pay rise at 22%. Now, some people might agree with that and that it was long overdue. But where is the reform that's coming with it?
I will obviously come to you in a minute, but Nigel.
Yeah, look, there's some interesting comments on that website at the moment. I suspect Wes suspected that may come that way as well. I like Wes. I think he's an honest, decent person. But they've had 14 years in opposition. Governments need to lead. And I think this is an excuse to kick things into the long grass again, because this government is realising governing is difficult. You can't do all the things that the public demand with limited resources and when you don't have enough money. And in the NHS, I'm afraid we're already seeing them fail. Instead of getting reform out of it, they're just throwing more money at it. And we all know that that is not the solution. So I wish him luck in this, but I would like to see a little bit more leadership rather than appealing to the public and asking for your views and opinions, which there's an element for that. But actually, I think what you need to see is action. You had a lot of promises from Labour on the opposition when they were the opposition over a very long period of time. And I'm afraid I want to see some action and delivery here.
OK. The woman with the blonde hair and the black top, so yes.
We had about 10 months ago, my family, including a 6- and an 8-year-old child, were taken off the NHS dental list. We had a dental emergency last week. I needed an emergency appointment, a tooth extraction, antibiotics, £310 for a 6-year-old. That included an X-ray, and as part of that X-ray, I was told that future work, I cannot afford to pay. That was a baby tooth. I cannot afford to go back to the dentist again to deal with any of that. When are we going to realise that actually we need more than just a big conversation? We need systematic change. You know, I'm a full-time public sector worker. I've paid my taxes, etc., but it's just failing, and people like I cannot afford to pay for this anymore.
Woman next to you.
Yeah, it's like Wes Streeting's plan last week, or announcement about the jabs for obese people. We need to be starting looking as a whole, as a bigger picture. You've got a population that were affected by the COVID jab, who are all desperate to go back to work. There's no pathway within the NHS for us. We tried to get help through the vaccine scheme. 15,000 people have applied and only 1% have been compensated for illnesses. There are people confined to wheelchairs, to their beds, everything. Right. And now he wants us to turn around and say, oh, take this. It's all trust and everything. When there is nothing. Solve the problems that were there before you start creating more.
All right, let me take one more point before I come to you. Yes, the man at the very back. With the glass, I can't quite see you actually.
Lady.
Lady, I'm so sorry. Forgive me, I'm so sorry. It's so awful. A, I'm short-sighted, and B, the light is shining straight at you, so I can't quite see you. Sorry.
I actually work in the NHS. I actually work in the emergency department, and we've given you, we've had this 10-year plan that we had going on, right? You've not even reached any of that for those 10 years. We shouldn't be telling you, as people in the NHS or members of the public, what you should be doing. It's obvious what needs to happen. I love my job and I love helping people. You can't attract people into the NHS the way it is. You need to start doing something now and action on things now and not have another 10-year plan. Come on, guys. What are we voting it in
Very
for?
powerfully put, I have to say. And clearly from the heart. I mean, Wes Streeting has been Shadow Health Secretary for what? Well, he was Shadow Health Secretary for what? A couple of years, at least. So he's had all that time to think about what he wants to do. Reform or die is what he said about the NHS. I mean, what Emily's saying, what you're saying is just, get on with it. Why wait?
Well, they are getting on with it. We're looking at how we can create 40,000 more appointments every week because we've got waiting lists that are extending
but we're talking about this review,
years,
this consultation process.
But I don't think.
Hold on. You're losing staff hand over fist because they're tired and they're burned out.
Completely.
They can't give you any more. They can't work any harder. And all we're getting is not a lot of rest. We're not doing it. We're not working hard enough. We're not working fast enough. We're not seeing enough people. Enough's enough. You need to stop putting money in and investing properly and keeping your staff you've already got rather than leaving the country and working abroad somewhere else.
I completely understand the frustration you're expressing, madam. We feel it exactly the same because
so why have
the
this
NHS is broken.
Why have this consultation?
Because look, there are some principles that Wes and the government have laid out that we want to achieve, including moving from hospital-based care to care based in the community-based care, moving from analogue systems to better digital systems. The NHS has got lots of IT systems. People that work there will tell you that, but they don't speak to each other. It can take 10 minutes when you turn on a computer until you're actually able to use it because it's so antique. And there's more that we can do digitally to help people better self-diagnose, book their own appointments, identify treatments that they may be able to access without direct medical intervention. Moving from sickness to prevention seems very important to me. We lost my dad recently, but it seemed to me that they could have intervened much earlier he started getting dementia. They could have intervened much earlier on and made his life comfortable rather than waiting until the bitter end when it was too late to come in. Now, all of those are principles
I'm
we know
so sorry
that we
to hear
want
that,
to
but the question
is
what's the point of this big conversation?
Well, I wouldn't be dismissive about involving the public. I was a council leader back where we had this Chris Cubber incident where the gang problem was. We cut violent youth crime, by a third in 18 months because we involved the community and listened to them. I don't think we should disrespect the public or the views of people that are using services. I've just outlined some of the principles, but people will have a view about how you achieve that and how you do that in the best way. And I don't think we should dismiss people's views. It's change.nhs.org if you want to have your say. And a lot of people will have their say.
Well, I think you've already had your say, haven't you? We've heard you loud and clear. Loud and clear. Good for you. Danny.
Yeah, your government is going to be judged on one thing above everything else, and that is, can you fix our public services? Can you address the waiting list? Can you make sure Georgia has clean water to swim in? Yep. Can you fix our crumbling schools? And what we need is money. I hope next week in the budget that the Chancellor delivers the investment she's promising in those public services that have not just been neglected, but they've been vandalised for years. And so we do need money.
That's just not true.
But in defence of the big conversation, you mentioned my book called Power to the People, which is about how...
Well done, Danny. Well done. I mean, we've only got a minute to go, so well done for getting it in.
We have historically low levels of trust in our elected politicians. Only 7% of us think that they're acting in our best interest. And what we need is a participation revolution. We, the people, need to be far more involved in making decisions, whether that's through citizens' assemblies, getting rid of the House of the Lords and making it a House of the People. There are ways that we need to modernise our democracy if we're to have any chance of rebuilding trust in politics.
Yep. Okay. And on the NHS, here's your chance.
All right, OK. That is all we've got time for. Look at all your hands up. I'm so sorry. A big sigh from you there. OK, look, 10 seconds. You've got 10 seconds to say so. Go on.
I'm going to throw a clanger in now. Menopause.
Oh.
Why are we still having a postcode lottery of menopause? OK? So change... this is something that women don't ask for. I didn't ask for this menopause. And why is it that my colleague from one end of Plymouth can get particular medication, I have to fight, and I live the other side?
Harris raised that this week.
You made your point. Well done, you.
Thank you.
We've all heard it. OK, thank you. Right, we're out of time. That is all for this week. Thank you very much to our panel. Thank you very much to all of you for coming and making your points so well and so forcefully. We heard you all. Thank you very much indeed. Where are we next week? Guildford next week. So see you then from Plymouth. Bye-bye.